We're moving now into tips for interactions with families. First, we wanted to start off with Samira. As a social worker with the experience she has, what did she think social workers should consider in terms of families' knowledge of systems and understanding of CPS that might help child protection workers know what type of education and orientation support is needed?
They don't learn that we have city government, county government, state government, national government. They don't understand how that all scales up, how law enforcement intersects, how child protection might intersect. And because of that lack of knowledge in how these systems operate, and just maybe more of a macro perspective of the United States has these things to offer me potentially, or safety to offer me, it would probably be likely that they're highly unaware of the systems that they're intersecting with, probably on a very regular basis. In terms of having worked with some of the refugees here and talked to them and asking them questions, the lack of awareness, they're aware that there is kind of that gap in their knowledge and that could be a barrier, but they're not always sure how to overcome that. And so it's just kind of like these are the things that I'm doing right now, and I'm going to stick with that.
Arash also lent personal perspective from his own experiences of adjusting to the U.S.
Trust doesn't come easily with a lot of these Afghans because of war, because of all the trauma they have had to face for the past 43 years. A lot of these people were born into war, and all they've known is war, which creates a lot of PTSD, creates a lot of trauma, creates a lot of distrust. So take your time with these people, be patient if you can. Understand there's a huge cultural difference. Understand these folks came from a very different world, and having to adjust to this culture itself is also traumatic. A lot of times when there's only one or two people working in the family, they don't know how they're going to pay rent. They don't know how they're going to afford food. They don't know how to even go to the grocery store sometimes because they don't understand public transportation. That by itself can be very traumatic. I remember myself coming here as a 10-year-old into the States. My parents had a really difficult time the first 5 years or so. Luckily for my mom and my dad, they had a lot of family members here to help them through the process. But just going to a doctor, I remember personally, there are people that were called before us, even though we were at the doctor's office ahead of them because they had appointments. And my dad didn't understand that at all, which ticked him off. He's like, favoritism, racism, what's going on? But these are small cultural things that they might have a harder time understanding because setting appointments is not something they do in Afghanistan. You just go to the doctor and first come, first serve. That's all you understand. So understand that there's some things that you might take for granted as a cultural understanding that they won't, for them, they can't even register because they've never been exposed to it. To take your time with that and explain things, even things that you might think are common sense, for them it might not be common sense. So if you can explain things in detail, it might be very helpful.
Now that we know what we might expect, how should we start?
When you meet an Afghan, handshaking is not really the way to greet them. What you do a lot of times, you just put your hand on your heart and just nod your head a little bit and say salam alaikum or just say hello, whatever you're comfortable with. Just putting your hand on your heart means I'm coming from the heart. I'm coming from a good place. And that's the traditional way of greeting somebody in Afghanistan. Culturally, even through Islam itself, you don't touch the opposite sex unless they're a family member or is a partner, a husband or wife of yours. Um, so yes, put your hand on your heart and do not shake somebody from the opposite sex hands. It's usually a no-no. Afghans are historically known to be very hospitable. As soon as you go into their house, they will offer you tea, they'll offer you snacks, cookies, whatever they have in their home, they will offer it to you. It's tradition. When somebody comes into your home, it's an honor, and you're supposed to give everything you have to them and make them feel as comfortable as possible.
First interaction is a big deal too, even for Afghans culturally. Being polite, being warm and welcoming is very important, even if you're entering their space and they're not meeting you somewhere. I think for Afghans, greetings is actually like a really huge cultural factor. If I were to walk into a room full of Afghans and not say hello, I would instantly walk away with a reputation of, oh my God, that person is so disrespectful and they know better. I think they would certainly give somebody from the government a little bit more grace than that, or any other referral that they would come into interaction with, because they know that that person is an Afghan. But a good way to start off is to say hello, to put out your hand to shake, or sometimes you can circumvent that whole thing because some people don't want to shake hands and just put your hand over your heart. Like, they really like to greet people like this if they don't want to, do physical touch interactions. A way to show like, hey, I'm humbly saying hello to you. If you're entering their home, observe, like, do they wear shoes in their home? Probably not. Most people in my culture don't. Take your shoes off, walk in, be prepared for the hospitality and welcome it. Like, let them baby you a little bit. That's our culture. That's our vibe. We're known for being hospitable people. And they really want to show you that they're thankful, that they're deferring to you as their guest. And so, take that role with some grace and humility and show up for them in that way. I think that would start you off on a really good foot. Say hello, explain your name, your role, why you're there, what you can help with, or the limitations of your role too, right? These are things I can help with. These are things that, maybe I can point you in the right direction, but I won't be able to accomplish. So those types of things, I think, offer the clarity necessary for starting off on the right foot.
In the past few decades, Afghanistan has become much more patriarchal than it used to be. So because of that, you have to really go through the mail if you're going to communicate anything that matters for the family, especially if you are male yourself, if you identify male yourself. So you have to talk to the husband, and if the husband is not around, then the oldest son. A lot of times, if you go to somebody's home, the woman or the girls, if you are male especially, will not even come out of their room. They will stay in their room because you don't expose yourself to people you don't know in that way. So yes, you have to talk to the dad, and if not, you have to talk to the older son for it to be accepted a lot of times.
Both Arash and Samira also talked about cross-cultural ethics for confidentiality and building trust.
Yeah, so one thing about Afghans, the idea of signatures and paperwork, it doesn't necessarily register. It's a very Western concept, right? To, for example, sign something on a dotted line and say this is confidential. They don't know if it's confidential. They have to trust you for them to feel like it's confidential. So, I think to build that trust, it takes time sometimes. Maybe you have to visit that family a few times. They have to see your face. They have to see you're not there just to use them for something. And they have to want to they get to know you a little bit. You have to, when you go into their house, accept a glass of tea. Accept a couple of the cookies that they put in front of you or the snacks they put in front of you. I think that will make that family feel a little bit more comfortable, that you are comfortable around them, and make them feel more comfortable around you. At the same time, if you want to maybe contact an organization like Afghan Culture Society and have one of the case managers from Afghan Culture Society come join you in this meeting, I think it'll be a good way to make that family or that person feel a bit more comfortable initially. The thing that also you have to be aware is that 40 plus years of war has also created a lot of mistrust amongst Afghans themselves. It's created a lot of ethnic tension. It's created tension between just peoples from different regions in general. War will do that. A lot of people have died in Afghanistan. There's a lot of people that don't trust each other. There's been civil war. There's been occupation. People have sided with different groups. So because of that, people just don't trust each other. So it takes time. Dotted lines and signatures don't necessarily make people feel comfortable. What makes them feel comfortable is knowing you're there for a good reason. You're not there to use them in any kind of way.
With Afghans or probably any other cultural minority who has an English language barrier, they're going to want to sign anything you put in front of them. And it is your job as the person working with them to make sure they understand what they're signing. So it's important for them to know who is going to get this information, why they're getting this information, what information they're going to be taking, answering those types of questions for them ahead of time. the scope of the confidentiality, the limitations of the confidentiality, and limitations being a huge factor there. Before getting them to do it. So if you can use translation services, wonderful. They should be able to provide an explanation for the who, the what, the why this information is being used, why we need to have a conversation about privacy in terms of this information. So that would be where I would probably broach the subject that way. But I think it will still come with its challenges, but that's probably your best standard of practice in terms of approaching confidentiality with an Afghan family or any minority family.
In our final video, we'll discuss how to approach situations when cultural family roles and parenting practices brush up against U.S. expectations, how to modify behavior, and how to do effective cross-cultural parent coaching.